Hey everybody, today we're going to be doing a hot little Bible study. Specifically, we'll be talking about the myth of Adam and Eve, one of the first stories in Genesis. Honestly, I don't have too much to say in this intro. I find the story of Adam and Eve extremely interesting and odd, and today I want to talk about it and how I think it works. And I hope you enjoy that. So, to start off, this is the most common way the story of Adam and Eve is told, the way that's particularly popular among Christian readers. First, God created Adam, and then soon after that, created Eve to keep this king company. He told Adam that he could eat from any tree in the Garden of Eden except for one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which he commanded them not to eat from. But then, a little while later, a serpent came over to Eve and was like, "Don't even worry about it. That fruit's super good. Go ahead, Eve. Eat from the tree. It'll be okay. Don't even think about it's not a problem. Listen to me. Eve, eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." So she ate from it and got her husband to eat from it. And when God found out about their disobedience, he got super mad, punished the couple, and forced them out of Eden. Forced them to feel pain, to die, to have trouble finding food to eat, etc. Now, this video is certainly not meant to make people question their faith or whatever, but I do want to push back on one of the most basic elements of this interpretation. Its claim that this story is about God punishing Adam and Eve for acting against his wishes. It's a reading that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and that's for a few major reasons. For one, pay attention to what God actually says to Adam about the apple of the knowledge of good and evil. And yes, by the way, I know that it's not technically an apple, but I'm extremely mercenary and will be calling it an apple here because it's easy and fun to draw. So, this is what the Bible says. "And the Lord commanded the man, 'You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die.'" So, looking at this, sure, what God does here is referred to as a command, but it doesn't seem like the kind of command that you'd punish someone for breaking. Imagine a father telling his daughter, "You can do a lot of things in this house, but you can't touch fire. If you do, you'll certainly be burnt." Now, yes, the father here is prohibiting fire poking. He doesn't want his kid to do it. But it's more like a warning than a command, right? And if the kid does touch the flame, it doesn't seem likely that the dad would punish her over it. After all, she was already burnt. And, that was the main outcome he was trying to avoid in the first place. This is how I read God here, as an entity that is warning Adam, telling him that he shouldn't eat the apple because doing so will harm him, cause him to surely die. And when Adam does eat the apple, well, he does eventually die. In the same way that getting burnt is a consequence of touching fire, dying and hurting is a consequence of eating the apple. But there's another, maybe more important point here. So it's unclear exactly what this apple does to the people who eat it. But if we take the name of the fruit even slightly literally, you'd think that the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil would, make people aware of good and evil. Therefore, before Adam and Eve ate the apple, they didn't have that knowledge. For that reason, it seems extremely odd to me to punish Adam and Eve for their apple eating. After all, they presumably had no idea they were supposed to not do that in a moral sense. No idea that obeying God was the ethical thing to do. And looking at these two observations, I feel like we have to ask a question. If God was simply punishing Adam and Eve for disobeying him, what exactly does this myth explain? What would the point of it be? See, I'm an atheist, and when I read this text, I do so with the assumption that this was something people came up with in order to explain the world around them in some way. Primarily, this story seems to be an attempt to explain why there is suffering in the world, why life is painful and short and taxing. But if God was punishing us, even though what he said reads more like a warning than a demand, even though the people he was talking to had no understanding of morality, then he would just be a terrible, arbitrary weirdo who harmed people under unfair circumstances. And what does that tell us about why we suffer? What does it add to our understanding of the world? Nothing. It's just saying we suffer because we do, because someone randomly decided that we should. Cool. Interesting. For these reasons, I have to assume that if there's any thematic value in this story, it comes from the understanding that God did not wish us poorly when he kicked us out of Eden. That when he kicked us out, he kind of had to. And if we wanted to ask why he may have had to, I can only imagine one real explanation. That, from the perspective of Genesis, an understanding of right and wrong is not exclusively an intellectual thing, an abstract concept like algebra or something like that. Rather, having an ethical mind requires a world where those ethics matter, where people can experience terrible things, where your actions have severe and important consequences, where you understand why inflicting harm is bad because you know what it is to be harmed. Why did Adam and Eve have to leave the Garden of Eden after they ate the apple? Well, I think it's because if they stayed, the apple wouldn't do the thing it purports to do: give people morals. But this idea leaves us with a puzzle, one that really confuses me and that motivated me to make this video in the first place. So, okay, let's just say I'm right, and that according to Genesis, we must know suffering if we are to be moral creatures. That's kind of cool and interesting, but it does leave us with a question. Why then doesn't God have to suffer in this way? Let's rewind. On the first page of Genesis, we learn that God created man in his own image, or likeness, or shadow. And that's an interesting line because it seems like nothing could be further from the truth. Sure, we may or may not look like him in a literal sense, but there are so many ways in which we could not be more different. I don't know if the God of Genesis is omniscient or omnipotent. It's a bit of a controversial subject, and it's not like he ever comes right out and says he is. But he certainly knows a lot, and has orders of magnitude more power than any human has. He created the entire universe, after all. What's more, I think we can safely infer a few things about him, even if we can't know them for sure. Like, it's hard to imagine that God, this creature who pre-exists everything, would eventually die in the way humans die. It's hard to imagine that he'd have to go around and find food to survive. And as far as physical pain is concerned, well, it's hard to imagine God getting a bruise or cut. You know, that would be odd given his depiction here. So I don't know if God suffers in one way or another. It's difficult to say for sure. But regardless, it seems clear that whatever he experiences isn't anything like what happened to Adam and Eve after they ate the apple. And if we are to believe that the harms that came to the couple were necessary to make them moral entities, then what the fuck is up with God? How did he get away without having to do any of that stuff? And the answer to this question, I think, is as obvious as it is unexpected. From the perspective of Genesis, God simply isn't moral. At least, not moral in the way people are. He exists outside of the world, doesn't understand harm because he can't truly experience it. And yes, when Adam takes a bite of the apple, God says, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil," but maybe that's all God knows. The abstract difference between two utterly meaningless concepts. Maybe none of it is truly real to him. Now, I know the idea that God is not a moral entity is probably counterintuitive or even potentially sacrilegious to some. I mean, religious people often believe that God is the most ethical being that could ever be, the figure with the ultimate right to judge human actions. But personally, I find my reading here really helpful and almost cathartic. I talked before about how fundamentally different God and humans are, and those differences have always presented me with a bit of a challenge. Within this myth of our creation, God, a tremendously powerful, eternal being who feels no pain, decides to make people who are so weak, so finite, so stupid, so tortured. Why? What's the purpose of us when God is better in every way? What could he possibly get out of creating us? And through this interpretation, we at least get some idea what the answer to that question might be. He created us because there's one thing we can do that he can't. Be good. Be moral agents who are accountable to each other in ways that matter. In the final lines of this story, after God realizes that Adam and Eve have eaten the apple and gained its knowledge, he says this: "He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." Then, as the couple walk away, God places a flaming sword in front of the tree of life to prevent their returning to it. Looking at this final line, I always feel a temptation to think of God as selfish. And to be clear, I think that interpretation is pretty fair. Why does he get to eat both fruits, live forever, and know good from evil? Why would he deprive us of the gift that he has? The God of the Torah, and particularly of Genesis, seems generally awful, doesn't he? Knocking our towers down, murdering us, flooding the entire earth because he didn't like his own creations. And we can read this as just another example of that awfulness. Him forcing us to suffer in ways that he never has to. But I don't know if that's the whole story. After all, God is the sort of being who would flood the earth, murder us, knock our towers down. And in this moment, he had a choice: to allow us to eat the fruit of life and be like that, be gods, or to have us be people. And maybe God chose the latter because he knew that on some level, we could be better than he is. So that's the end of the video, and now it's time for our Patreon question and stuff. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Kaspersky. During this video, we talked about Adam and Eve getting judged for the actions that they took in the Garden of Eden. But now, I want to talk about you being judged for the actions that you do online. Do you ever think about how the government keeps track of everything you do and say, and how easily various governments and corporations could use data about your actions in social circles in order to rate you? A social rating that could have consequences on your ability to live your life and take out loans and stuff? And how many countries already see the use of social ratings in various arenas? As a satirist and provocateur online, a bit of a political court jester, I think about things like this a lot. How I could make some edgy hot post on the internet that could come back to haunt me. How easily my beautiful privacy could be compromised. Besides, as a YouTuber, I know how easily one of my highly controversial takes could cause me to be demonetized, or cause people to come after me with a righteous fury. Although there's no way to shield yourself from risk completely, it's always good to try to minimize it. Check out the Kaspersky project at the link in the description, and learn more about how you can help keep your private information to yourself, and make it so nobody can touch any of your things. So that's the end of the video. You made it. You made it past the ad. Now it's just you and me talking, baby. This video was made with consultation by the wonderful Rabbi Serkman. It was drawn by the beautiful and intelligent Moth Cub, and it was written by me and directed by me. If you liked it, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Give me money on Patreon if that's the sort of thing that you want. Got some perks over there that are pretty cool. And now it's time for my Patreon question of the video. I'll do 2 today because I'm feeling spry. Philip Woolley asks, what is your spirit animal? I don't believe in such things. I don't believe in a spirit. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in spirits. That's really a hard question to answer because I don't believe in that. I guess like a big beluga whale though. Maybe like a big old whale. I feel like that's my identity. Hayden Grief Neal asks, what's your favorite flavor? Lemon. Anything citrus. That's what I like. Okay. Bye.